Yo, what's up YouTube? It's Cynical Apex here, coming at you today with a video in which we will be discussing, well, more having a little bit of a point/counterpoint themed debate about what we are calling the Great Regulation Debate of YouTube, or rather, as you'll see in the thumbnail and the title, YouTube, the Great Regulation Debate. We'll be discussing the origin of the debate, as well as some of the points that have been brought up by both sides, and my personal viewpoint on this debate, and also on the landscape of YouTube as a whole. So consider this sort of as an all-encompassing topical review / debate, if you wish to call it that, or you can just look at it for what it is, and that is just another person spouting their opinion on a topic that has been often talked about in and out, sort of in a cyclic nature. It always seems to come up every now and again, but it always just seems to lurk in the shadows as sort of an undercurrent of sorts. In saying that, I don't normally do videos because it's just not my thing, but this is actually something that I thought you can actually extract some very, very interesting discourse from, and actually acquire a greater understanding of sort of the dichotomy between YouTube, what broadcasting is in general, and what the regulations are in regards to like FCC, and whether or not they can actually carry over to YouTube. And that is why I am here today. So without further ado, let's get this started. So, what was the origin of this debate? What does this debate have its roots in? The answer to that is actually quite simple. There were two videos, one posted in 2018 and one posted just a few weeks ago to begin this decade, the 2020s, but done by a YouTuber by the name of Nerd City. The one in 2018 didn't attract as much interest, although back then there was circulatory debate and discussion about the topic of Jake Paul and his advertising tactics towards children, which we'll come back to in a little bit, because I do want to discuss that further. And then the most recent one, and the one that has reignited the whole regulatory debate, and whether or not regulations should be further imposed upon YouTube, whether that be internally by YouTube itself or externally by governmental sources. And that was actually on Lele Pons. Full disclosure time, I'm not a fan of either Jake Paul or Lele Pons. However, I am going to remain objective in this, and I am not going to claim that either of them have broken laws as they stand, as neither of them technically have broken any laws, which means that they really haven't. So don't take this as an attack on them, because it's not meant to be. Their sort of kiddie bop videos just aren't my personal taste, but that's not the discussion at hand here, nor will it likely be a discussion topic on this video if I ever do take this on more consistently, as that's not really the sort of thing that I think you can really give a deep dive to, which is something that I'm going to try to specialize when it comes to posting videos for this channel. So what I will actually be talking about is, do those two creators in particular actually influence regulators from a governmental standpoint, like the FTC or even the FCC, and cast their glances upon YouTube, or even if YouTube is actually considered a broadcasting platform or a broadcasting medium to the same extent that television and radio are, both of which answer to the FTC and the FCC in America and relevant regulatory bodies worldwide, no matter where you live. And the answer to that is honestly yes. Because if you're looking at it from the standpoint that YouTube is the television of today, you are of course going to get regulatory bodies creating regulations, or rather guidelines, in order to make sure that the content does not run afoul of the law and is held to a similar standard to what we see television and radio held to. However, there is a different dichotomy, as YouTube is worldwide, whilst television and radio is usually centralized within one country's infrastructure, so it is easier to regulate those than it is to regulate an entity like YouTube. However, you can use the FTC and FCC here, as YouTube is based in America. And as such, those two regulatory bodies will be my reference point and my consideration for this discourse. There is something that I do want to make really crystal clear about this, though, before we move on. And that is that regulation does not in any means mean censorship. In fact, it's almost impossible to correlate the two in this situation, as you'll see right now. As you can see, the FCC does not censor, or rather restrict for the most part, what is broadcast on television and radio, which would also transfer over to YouTube. Unless YouTube were the ones doing the censoring, much like television and radio stations, they would not be forced to censor something, whether or not that is offensive, stereotypical, or whatnot, which is covered a little later on than this point in the manual, but falls under the same guidelines here of freedom of speech and freedom of expression, or for Americans as they are well known, the first constitutional amendment. Which is why I also refer to sort of the FCC and FTC rules as more guidelines than laws. Because laws, although they are a governmental body, are set by the government themselves, with consideration to First Amendment rights, or really any constitutional rights that Americans, or even in sort of a global sense, citizens of any particular country have just by existing, so rather inherent rights. Which means that yes, Lele and Jake can post whatever they want, as long as it stays within the guidelines that the FCC, or really any regulatory body in any country. However, as previously stated, the onus is indeed on YouTube to self-regulate, something that is admittedly difficult due to the global nature of videos that are coming in on a daily basis on YouTube, which is more of a globalized, centralized hub, more so than an individual television or radio network, which the FCC and other guidelines are more capable and more focused on handling. Which again comes back to the point of centralized versus decentralized. Now, as a counterpoint, people will bring up that YouTube has never really needed regulations in the past, and that for the most part, the regulations that have been enforced have been by YouTube and have been somewhat akin to censorship. Something that I can actually see the point of, because they are right in the sense that there was a time, a more simpler time it should be said, when YouTube was more about the creators and just posting whatever they felt like or whatever they pleased. And yes, at its core, at its fundamental, as I said when I referenced the First Amendment, that is something that is necessary in order for people to truly be able to express themselves. But I will counter that by bringing up the fact that YouTube has always had rules and regulations. Rather, you can consider them guidelines if you want, but yes, they are rules and yes, they are regulations, as sort of a business protocol, which is a regulatory principle in order to make sure that all creators are being held to the same or a similar standard that is in line with what radio and television broadcasters are. And I am well aware that YouTube aren't the greatest when it comes to consistency, which is something that I fully understand. And I actually honestly do agree with the frustration about inconsistency and lack of transparency when it comes to the rules and regulations from YouTube. As it becomes a head scratcher and it becomes a point where it almost gives the illusion that they are targeting certain YouTubers, which, I don't know, they could very well be, but I'm going to hold them to sort of the principle that they're not, and that they just sometimes are more lenient or more stringent depending on where the rules are and just what sort of mindset they're in at the time, which is not a good business model, and does give credence to the arguments that we don't need any more regulations if YouTube don't know how to control their own regulations. However, I will actually say the inverse. The fact that YouTube do not know how to stabilize and do not know how to transparently and consistently follow the rules and regulations for all creators rather than just subsections that may be favored by them or that they may not like. Yes, the principle of preferential treatment does apply, means that the FCC and the FTC are going to swoop in, and they are going to start casting their net on YouTube, seeing as after all, as I have stated in the past, that yes, this is the television of the social media and digital age or landscape that we find ourselves in. Which is what I personally think Nerd City was indirectly inferring with his now infamous "the regulators are coming home to roost" comment, and one that did stir up a lot of controversy as him being pro-regulation. A point that I actually do not agree with. I saw it as more of sort of a, if YouTube aren't going to enforce rules, if they aren't going to look at what the FCC are looking for when it comes to sort of television and other television regulations, and the FTC when it comes to advertising and marketing, specifically to children. And yes, I am well aware that YouTube has YouTube Kids, but we all know that children do watch regular YouTube as well, whether or not that is with parental supervision. So they are going to be considered when it comes to marketing and advertising, just as they are for television, just as they are for radio. Then yes, they are going to draw the ire of the FTC and the FCC and global regulatory bodies, depending on the countries that the videos are being broadcast to, or the country of origin of the creator themselves. Though that also falls into sort of the issue of regulations, because regulations in, say, Germany or France could be different to America, and of course YouTube are more answerable to American regulatory bodies, which is, as I said, the main reason why I was using the FCC and FTC. For those who don't know, and I will apologize for not saying this earlier, the FTC is the Federal Trade Commission and the FCC is the Federal Communications Commission, who answer themselves to the Communication Act. Something that I can see soon enough encompassing online mediums like YouTube, if it doesn't already. And even on a global front, I can see the Communications Acts in all countries around the world also encompassing YouTube as we move more into sort of a digital age. Well, we already have, and our focus has gone more from traditional TV and traditional radio, even though those two mediums do exist and are probably the more popular broadcasting mediums, to online access, which is something that you can access whether or not you're on the run or sort of on the go via your phone, or at home just sitting down in front of a desktop or laptop computer with just a click of a button and typing in www.youtube.com or whatever website you wish to go on that streams, like Twitch, like Crunchyroll if you're doing anime, or whatever service provider you are using. That includes Disney Plus and Netflix in order to consume the products that you are watching. So, how do we actually fix this problem? And is there really a simple answer to it, aside from what I said earlier about more transparency and more consistency from YouTube? The answer is, I honestly don't think there is. So yes, I can see why people would rather not have as much focus on regulations due to sort of the First Amendment right, outside of course, obscene content, which I say obscene instead of just including indecent and profane content as well, as the latter two are actually protected by First Amendment rights and therefore cannot be directly censored by the FCC. But obscene content is not protected by First Amendment rights. So yes, the FCC can indeed censor those contents if YouTube don't do it themselves. Now, what is obscene content? It is essentially overly sexual content that is actually banned on all forms of television and radio, and it is one of those cases where you have to see whether or not it has literary, artistic, or educational value held within to decide whether or not it is obscene. And I know I said indecent and profane content is in fact First Amendment protected, however they do fall under the same guidelines. So essentially in the case of YouTube, that would be straight up porn, which if we go back to the two samples that Nerd City was using in regards to Jake Paul and Lele Pon, neither of them actually breach. Rather, the content that is considered obscene, indecent, and profane is hidden behind age restriction on YouTube, which we can consider the same as the time slot restrictions that are placed on television and radio broadcasts when it comes to said content. So yes, there is consistency there, which you might think would fly in the face of regulations being required. And I can agree with that. However, I would say that that is a case where the FCC's regulations have already arched to YouTube. So we already have an element of governmental regulation on YouTube already, which could also mean why wouldn't other regulations filter into the YouTube protocol, whether it be by YouTube itself or by the FCC overseeing things and stepping in and saying, hey, we're going to need you to add these regulations as we are starting to encompass the online platform or online broadcasting within them. Which I will agree with Nerd City is inevitable when lawmakers do catch up with the online medium. Should it be? The answer to that actually, as I have said, varies from person to person. And we have seen both spectrums of the debate, whether it be Nick Diorio and his camp on Twitter, or the Nerd City camp, including his fans and himself, discussing this in response to the Diorio camp, as I'm going to call them, which encompasses other YouTubers that follow the same line of thinking as Nick, and those who follow Nerd City's line of thinking. Where do I stand on this? I'm honestly sort of in the middle, in where I can understand where both sides are coming from. However, I believe it is sort of a complex issue that, although I've only really scratched the surface here, I will be doing a follow-up video where I do go a little more in depth about this. I just wanted to get out the sort of the surface level arguments and sort of explain a few things to you guys first. But as I said, I am sort of in the middle, where I do think regulations are needed, but I also think that part of it is consistency and transparency from YouTube itself, and I think part of it is also governmental regulators like the FCC, like the relevant authorities worldwide, all having certain standards and principles that are able to encompass social media landscape and online broadcasting platforms like YouTube in a hand-in-glove sort of fit. Is that going to be an easy task? No, and I have never presented it as being an easy task. In fact, I do think it is sort of a weird dichotomy, which is why I wanted to do this video in the first place and discuss this sort of issue. As I said, there will be a follow-up, so I'm going to actually let you guys go now, and we will discuss more in a future video that will more than likely be posted either tomorrow or Friday. But as I said, for now, I am going to let you guys go. And I just want you to look at this sort of as an explanation, as sort of a point/counterpoint sort of argument on a surface level. But anyway, bye!